Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome into the Slumpbuster with Juju and Dre, episode 5, recording here on Friday, August 30th, 2019. We have a variety of different topics, but first you gotta subscribe, listen, review via Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. We are talking about Andrew Luck's retirement, Conor McGregor's ESPN interview, Boogie Cousins, AB Twitter beef, Team USA struggles against the Aussies. You name it, we got it. Sit back, bust the weekday slump, and enjoy. Welcome in, Dre. Thank you for joining me bright and early on a Friday morning. So early morning for you, late night for me, coming off night shift. So I've thought about something. Is it technically moonlighting as a podcaster if I work during the night?
I guess it is, yeah, here in the morning. So you're burning the midnight oil.
Yeah, I guess so. But they do say that the candle that burns twice as bright tends to burn twice as fast. So I guess we'll kind of see how that goes. But I guess without further ado, because we got a lot to talk about. So thankfully we're a little unburdened right now, not having talked about the division breakdowns. Fun segments to do, but not going to lie, talking all that football kind of wears on you a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does. Though it's always fun, right?
But guess what? We got to talk more football today. This was an interesting weekend. So since we last talked, we saw a young, promising career suddenly come to an end. A lot of people, a lot of people are not happy about this. So tell me, Dre, how do you feel about Tom Holland no longer being Spider-Man?
So I am incredibly upset about that. Sony, I have no idea what they're thinking, right? So the Avengers saved their whole Spider-Man franchise. They've been garbage since Tobey Maguire, though the first and the second were really good. After that, it just went downhill really quickly. And then Andrew Garfield, I thought they were fun movies. Again, they just didn't feel right. But then you throw in Tom Holland and the Avengers, it felt right. It just felt good, had good connection with the rest of the Avengers. They started even having some pretty decent storylines. Venom was a little more hit and miss for me, but I still enjoyed it. But now I have no idea what the heck they're doing. What are your thoughts?
I am just not looking forward to seeing Uncle Ben get shot one more time.
So do you think if they reboot the Spider-Man, series, do you think they would redo that again? I mean, everybody knows that Uncle Ben dies.
At this point, honestly, I am so through spending money on Spider-Man reboots. If Sony honestly reboots this series, I'm out. I'm done. Spoiler alert, but the movie's been out for a couple months, so you can't blame me on this one. So the way they ended that movie was so perfect, bringing back J. Jonah Jameson, spacey on the actor's real name, but he's J. Jonah Jameson to me. But anyway, they had that. They had a sick ending. I was looking forward to what was going to happen next. And then Sony said, oh, guess what? We're going to come in and ruin things because what does Sony do better than anyone else? Ruin promising Spider-Man franchises. So,
yeah, no, and I mean, I have heard that Disney is kind of being jerks and flexing their power, but at the same time, rightfully so. I don't think the Spider-Man series would be as popular if they had never joined up with Disney in the first place.
It's going to be interesting. So who's negotiating from a position of strength here? Because the way I'm actually looking at it, if you think about it, I think Disney needs Spider-Man severely as they move into this next phase of the MCU, because no more Tony Stark, no more Captain America. Spider-Man was going to be the guy to lead the series, I feel as though.
Yeah. I mean, so I think Marvel's done a good job with some of their characters that nobody would have cared about, right? So people now really enjoy Black Panther. They really care about Doctor Strange, even Winter Soldier. A lot of people are like, oh, I kind of like that. I think you're right, though. Spider-Man had the biggest sort of star power punch of their comic book heroes. Everybody loved Spider-Man growing up. Everybody was like, oh, he's one of my favorites. So in that sense, you're right. But at the same time, I think Sony was not going to have a very successful Spider-Man series without it being tied back into the Avengers. So, I mean, I think they both need each other, right? So hopefully they come to a middle ground and figure out, okay, here's what works best for both companies. And they just continue the partnership.
One can only hope. And now, as much as I would have loved to talk Spider-Man with you all day. As luck would have it, we're going to be talk about this big retirement that just happened. So Andrew Luck is officially retired from the NFL. He missed the entire 2017 season. He comes back, has an amazing year. And then here we are in 2018. He's suffering through this weird Achilles, calf, little tiny teeny bone issue. Then suddenly he's gone. Just game 3 of the preseason decides, I'm done with this. I'm tired of rehabbing. I'm tired of the cycle of constantly being hurt, rehab, play, hurt, rehab, play, get hurt again. Offensive line's trash, then they're good. What do you make of this whole thing?
So I will say that it was very surprising. So I was quite surprised when he came out and he announced it. But at the same time, I don't know if I really fault him for that. I think you can have passion for something, but at some point you got to make the decision that's best for your family, right? That's best for you, best for your mental health. And so I'm not too surprised after he puts it in the context of, hey, I was hurt every year, which everybody's always said that. He's one of the best quarterbacks there is, but he does get injured often. He is injury prone. And I don't know if it was issues with the training staff that he had available or just his body, was just more injury prone than other players. But it does suck to constantly be hurt. And so, even myself back in like high school and early college, right, when I would play sports, is injuries definitely take a toll and take your spirit out of you. So I had, back injuries and shoulder injuries and I still even today live with those problems. And it sucks having, to get out of bed extra slow, or there's days you can't go to the gym. And I can only imagine, right? So like I only did high school sports and then did like intramural stuff through college and all that. So I can only imagine what getting hit by, some of these linebackers is like every single weekend and then trying to, live your life. So.
But also too, like you weren't getting paid $30 million a year to do that. And all things considered, so we were individual sport athletes being in wrestling ourselves. We didn't have an entire roster of 52 other guys, including executives, plenty of sports bettors out there, fans, basically a whole industry behind us. So it's definitely not just Andrew Luck's decision in itself. It's not just a singular decision that affects only him. There is a bit of a trickle-down effect. Now, with all that said, does that outweigh a guy's mental priorities? I mean, I definitely do think that Andrew Luck deserved to retire like he did. I would have just changed it up a little bit. Like, we're talking about 2 weeks before the season. Granted, the more I kind of analyze this, the way the Colts were talking about is he was potentially going to be back by week 1. I don't think that was going to happen. I think he realized that wasn't going to happen. In fact, this was probably going to be more of a long-term injury at this point, given they were already preparing Jacoby Brissett to be the starter as we grew closer to the season.
Yeah, and so I think you definitely have a point, right? Is there's a lot of guys that, either re-sign with the Colts because they thought, hey, we had a fantastic year. I can't remember. I think they were the team that re-signed all of their free agents this offseason. So not a single person said, nope, I'm out. And I think it's because they bought into the system. And especially if you're, on the offense, you're buying into, hey, I have a really good quarterback supporting me, right? Like if you're a wide receiver, half the time, it's your talent, but the other half is who's throwing to you. Because if you have an awful quarterback, right, like you don't want to be in that system as a wide receiver or any offensive player for that matter. So I do think it sort of sucks the way that Andrew Luck did it. It's basically the equivalent to, not giving your 2 weeks notice at your job, right? And so I understand the fans being upset. But at the same time, like I said, to me, I personally can't fault the guy too much. I wish he would have done it better, and then I think it would have been a warmer welcome for him, right? Like, if he had done it at the end of last season or something, I think fans would have been confused and puzzled because they had such a good season, but I think it would have been received a lot better. But now it's, unfortunately had even fans booing the poor dude, right? After he gave so much to the franchise, and it's because of poor timing. So yes, I totally agree. The timing was bad and poor, but at the same time, like I said, I understand where he's coming from. I totally get it, especially from a mental and physical health standpoint. And that was the thing that made me the most sort of upset with the Colts fans that booed him, is you have a guy that literally said, like, hey, I'm constantly in pain. I'm looking out for my mental health. And those are the things that we always tell people, oh, you need to value that. You need to value that. But then we're going to boo a guy that gave so much to your franchise, right? When he tells you these are the issues and this is why I'm quitting. And so I personally didn't like that from the fans. I thought that was in poor taste.
Well, I guess, and granted, I don't encourage the booing of Andrew Luck as a whole. I will say that fans are supposed to be erratic. It's supposed to be management that's supposed to be the stabilizing force. And unfortunately, this news wasn't supposed to have been leaked in the middle of the game. It was supposed to be a post-game announcement, at least the way that Andrew Luck had planned it out. And fans, if you're just sitting, you think that they went to preseason week 3 out of just joy for watching a glorified scrimmage? No, they wanted to kind of like see their best players. Even if Andrew Luck wasn't going to be actively playing, they wanted to be there to support the optimism of the season that was about to happen. And that's just all gone. Like this team, like in our division breakdown just a couple weeks ago, I had them as my division winner. I believe you had them as your division winner as well. Now,
Yep.
Now we're talking about a team that will be lucky to win 4 games. Now we'll talk about kind of like what the Colts' future looks like. But not just this year. You were hoping to have Andrew Luck for another 10 years. With the way his injury history was shaping up, I don't think it would have lasted that long anyway. But at minimum, you were expecting to dominate this conference for going on a decade. Chiefs, Colts, similar how we were talking about Brady versus Manning all those years.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely disappointing to see such a good talent walk away so young. And that's the thing is I was listening to, a few other shows and they're saying a lot of the guys that normally walk away that are okay with, hey, I've got to a point where my body's starting to break down, I'm walking away. They've usually accomplished all that they could have. Whereas I think the biggest thing with Andrew Luck is a lot of people still feel like, hey, he still had so much to accomplish, right? As far as winning Super Bowls, I think he probably could have won at least 2 Super Bowls. He's the type of quarterback, at least talent-wise, that could have won 2 Super Bowls. Now, of course, that would have meant his body had to stay healthy for that length of time, post-Brady era, and let's see if he could compete with Pat Mahomes. But it is disappointing to see.
Well, Jim Irsay, their owner, came out and said that it'd be a disappointment if they didn't win multiple Super Bowls with Andrew Luck. Now they're not even going to win one. Now Andrew Luck will go down as never having won an MVP, and it's almost a coincidence that his career is basically going to end the same season that Robert Griffin III's career ends for 2 different reasons. Well, the same reason, injuries, but on 2 different scales.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, luckily for the Colts, they set themselves up well, and this is why we talk about the genius that is Chris Ballard. So last year he went out and traded for Jacoby Brissett, or not even last year, the year before that, gets Jacoby Brissett. Smart decision. This guy is highly touted coming out of the New England system. Now, the year he had to start in Andrew Luck's place, he only threw for 13 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. They had a bottom 3 pass attack, but he was sacked 62 times. I think last year Andrew Luck was sacked only a couple times himself. So that improvement's on the line. It's going to be interesting to see. Do you think that he can realistically push this team to at least still be relevant in the division?
I think so. I mean, they have a pretty good all-around team, and I've even heard arguments for them having the best all-around team on both offense and defense. The other thing is it always helps when you have more time in a system and you've just gotten more playing experience. I mean, even look at Mitchell Trubisky, right? He had a pretty good season last year, and his first year, nobody would have said that. So I would say on average, the more time that you have, the better you become, at least in the same system for a while. And then eventually people start to see, okay, you are what you are, right? And if you're a bad quarterback, 10 years down the road, it doesn't change that.
Okay, well, I'm going to pose this question to you. Let's say I tell you Jacoby Brissett throws for 24 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. What's the Colts record?
He throws for 24 touchdowns, 10 interceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So he's thrown about half as many interceptions.
For 13-7 the year that they went 4-12.
So I think that would put them probably in that like 7-9 range. So anywhere spanning from 6-10 to maybe 8-8 at most is where I would have them. So anywhere in that sort of 3-game span. What do you think?
Here's the thing. So right now I'm projecting this. So I think it's only fair that we completely redo our division breakdown in the sense of where we see teams finishing. Right now, I project the Colts as a 4-12 team. In fact, I'm going to pretty much take away. I'm going to say they go 1-5 in division now. So, whereas I predicted them potentially being maybe 4-2 in division, sweeping the division, now I'm going to have to boost everyone up. So, if I'm going 4-12 on the Colts, then I got to talk about maybe 7-9 on Tennessee. I originally had them at 6-10. I'm going to move the Jaguars from an 8-8 team and push them up to 10-6. And then when I look at Houston, they could potentially be a 12-4 team and run away with this division now.
I think you're right. I think it does make that entire division, it definitely elevates them, right? Because now you're not playing possibly the best team in the division. Now you're playing possibly the worst team in the division.
Yeah, and I do think that they could potentially steal one. I don't think that they'll necessarily get swept in division just because division games are always a bit funky. Like, you do see teams snag a win just because you play the same opponent twice. Sometimes you play them twice in 3 weeks, and you catch on their game plan and you know how to strategize against them a little better. And NFL's a lot more nuanced in that way of how you game plan for other teams, and any given Sunday is a legit thing.
Yeah, and I think there's also always a weird element when it comes to playing in your division and your division rivals, right? Playing in their stadium. It happens all the time with even like the AFC North, right, is the division that I know the best. Is there's years where Baltimore can have a really, really down year. And let's say the Steelers look really good. They can still go to Baltimore and lose just because it's the sort of division rivalry and the fans are getting crazy on the road and stuff like that. And there's a lot of emotion in those games. So here's how I have it breaking down. Houston, I think at 11-5. Yeah, I guess I would see adding another win to there. So 12-4, I don't think is unrealistic. Jacksonville, I had at 5-11. I still don't have a whole lot of respect for them, though I know that they're going to be probably better than I think. I don't know. Maybe for some reason, I'm just overly pessimistic on Jacksonville, or maybe I just hate Jacksonville or something. So I'll say they're going to go 6-10 now. The Titans.
Steelers game a couple years back, Blake Bortles.
Yeah, I'm still very bitter that Blake Bortles beat us, so they're never getting a better record.
At home.
I know. So I have them going 6-10. The Titans, I think, actually go 9-7, and then I'll have the Colts. I still hesitate to drop them down that low to where they're, a potential first, overall pick level. So I'll have them at 6-10. Though I don't know, like, would you tank with this team? You have such a good team, you just don't have a good quarterback.
Well, it's hard to say, too, because we gave Frank Reich a lot of benefit of the doubt because of how well the team performed. But when you lose Andrew Luck, it just completely throws off your entire game plan. We still have to see how good of a coach the sophomore Frank Reich is as a whole, and whether he could basically raise this team up from this adversity. They were planning on having Andrew Luck up until literally Saturday. So there still is kind of a mental toll that this is going to have on the team. We don't know if that's going to linger into their first few games or how long it's going to last. But too, you're also, when you go home, there's going to be a certain lack of optimism. There's a lot of exterior factors that could affect how this team performs on Sundays. Now, here's an interesting question. So if the Colts do finish in that top half of the draft, which I project, in fact, if they finish 4-12, we were pretty much talking about a top 5, top 10 draft pick right now. They luckily would be set up pretty well with next year's quarterback class. So obviously you got Tua coming out of Alabama. He's probably going to be number 1, so they have to be really bad to snag him. Justin Herbert out of Oregon, who could have came out last year, and then Jake Fromm, who's not that exciting, but he's probably going to go in the top 15. So at least they have options in that regard. Do you think that Jacoby Brissett can be good enough to hold off those guys? Or do you think that regardless of anything that happens, they need to be drafting quarterback in the first round next year?
I think regardless, they're going to draft a quarterback first round. I mean, it's also good just to have the insurance, right? Of, hey, we have another first round quarterback on our bench just in case, whoever it is that ends up winning the starting spot. Right now, Brissett, right, is not as good as we need them to be. So I definitely see them going quarterback first round in the draft.
Well, the rules of the modern NFL is if you draft a quarterback that high, he's bound to start during the year. We're going to see that potentially happen with even Daniel Jones this year, who many thought was a project. We saw what happened with Josh Allen the previous year. So if you're drafting quarterback high, you're pretty much expecting them to come in and play.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's Dwayne Haskins, though, right behind Case Keenum.
Which will probably last about 6 weeks before he's starting.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we'll just have to see what sort of happens this year, how it goes. I definitely think if they're in that range where we said they're going to be, right, anywhere from that 4-12 to maybe 6-10 range, I see them going quarterback right away.
Now, I'm going to close our Andrew Luck discussion because, honestly, this could carry like a whole show in itself, just how much of a shock value it was for the league. But I have a bit of a conspiracy theory. Do you think he'll be back? Because I know he had a very emotional presser. I know that there is a lot of emotion. I know, obviously, he got booed off the field. But I still think the thing about what you notice with a lot of these football players, it's their passion is still there. They still have that internal warrior spirit that they want to be out on the field. Let's say he rests this entire year, comes back healthy, new lease on life, feels worlds better. I think you could potentially see it because the last time Luck took a year off, obviously this team was bad enough to grab him a highly touted offensive guard out of Notre Dame, which saved his season, helped him out a little bit. Hey, they're back in the top of the draft. Luck says, you know what? I'm feeling good, guys. Get me Jerry Jeudy out of Alabama, the big wide receiver. Am I too bold in this conspiracy theory?
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Brett Favre retired 3 times.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? We just saw it with Jason Witten, right? Where he's like, hey, I'm done, I'm out. And then now he's like right back in. And I think that's the thing is when you've been doing something for so long and it's the way you've made your living and it's a lot of money, especially at the quarterback position, right? It is hard to walk away. And you're right. I think it was sort of an emotional, irrational decision that sometimes, maybe you're just like, hey, I'm upset, right? That maybe, my ankle, calf injury or whatever it is isn't getting treated the right way or it's just not healing as fast as I want it. I'm done with this. And that happens with players sometimes. Me personally, I don't think so. I think he's done. And I don't know if he's necessarily lost a passion for the sport, but I think he's at the point where it's like, hey, no, I definitely feel that my body has taken too much of a beating, and so it's time for me to walk away. So I think he stays retired.
Well, time heals injuries. Let's see if it can heal the emotional wounds as well. So, speaking of disappointing.
Hold on, real quick, I guess. Are there any other players that you see that might be sort of a risk for early retirement?
No. Okay, so I've heard this argument that will this start a trend of players just wanting to retire early? So there was another piece of news that came out. Obviously, Rob Gronkowski had a very emotional presser himself when he was pitching his CBD business. And he mentioned how he was losing his joy for the sport, how he was tired of all the injuries, how beat up he was from all the hits. But there's only a few players that could realistically can't even afford to retire early. Let's face it, Gluck has already made over $100 million in his career. Those bottom end guys, they can't afford to do the similar things. Even if you're still making $1 million, which is more money than you ever imagined yourself making in a lifetime, I still think that there is kind of like we talked about the sense of identity that comes with these players in their sports. We talk about the financial implications of not just setting yourself up for success, but setting up your grandchildren, your children's children, and so on and so forth for success. I think a lot of players realize that, and if they can play, they'll push themselves out there on the field to get it done. If anything, it could potentially be at the quarterback position. I was listening to Colin Cowherd a little bit, and he was mentioning potentially Deshaun Watson, who's similarly facing a lot of the issues Andrew Luck's facing in his career right now. Could be a option as far as how many hits he's taken just in the early part of his career. But I don't think it's going to be a trend. I think that a lot of people are too bold in making that prediction.
Yeah. So I want to say I agree. I don't know if it'll necessarily become a trend and we're just going to start seeing, players retiring left and right. Though I do worry about, one, Cam Newton. He's had quite the injury history, even dating back to college. And he's been taking quite a bit of hits. And then Deshaun Watson was, my other one is, there was a point where he was getting hit so hard that they thought his lungs would collapse if he were even riding on an airplane. And he got sacked like 65 times last year. So.
Yeah, I just don't see it. It's possible for like Cam just because his doctors may legitimately tell him no. But the thing that makes these situations different is I think most doctors are of the belief that Andrew Luck would have healed from this and could have come back. And I think that's why he's also getting criticized more from it. A former NFL quarterback came out with a Twitter thread this week basically saying, listen, man, like, it's going to heal. You just got to give it time. You mentioned irrational thinking. He was getting too lost in the moment. I'm tired of this rehab, everything like that. So I think it's going to be a little different. I think it depends on the degrees of injuries these guys face. Like if Cam Newton tears another rotator cuff, or like you mentioned, like let's say Deshaun Watson suffers similar neck injuries or something like Peyton Manning did, something like that. Maybe that could be a big swing pick, but I don't think it's going to necessarily happen. Maybe those two players might be some to highlight. But like I said, we have plenty of topics to cover, so let's kind of like move on forward throughout the show.
Absolutely.
So like I said, speaking of disappointing as Andrew Luck's sudden retirement is, we got to talk about the disappointment that is Team USA basketball right now. So they suffered their first international loss in 78 games. This is a streak that dates back all the way to 2006. Basically, they had a 10-point lead going into the second half against Australia, and they blew it. Out of nowhere, Patty Mills decided to just stick it to his current coach, and somehow the only team composed of all NBA players lost. Now, granted, it's not the real tournament. The real tournament's going to be starting up here in the next week. But what do we think of this team right now?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting in that you have quite a bit of young players, a lot more. And when I say young, I mean like really inexperienced, not battle-tested players. So if you look at the last World Cup, they had DeMarcus Cousins, Steph Curry, Anthony Davis, DeMar DeRozan, Andre Drummond, Kenneth Faried, Rudy Gay, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Mason Plumlee, Derrick Rose, Klay Thompson. Like that is legit, 5 all-stars starting, and then you even have an all-star or two coming off the bench, right? Mm-hmm. This year's team, you have Kemba Walker, okay, granted all-star, but even people have talked about, well, he's kind of a tier even below a Kyrie Irving, a lot of people have said. I don't know how you feel about that being a Boston fan. But you have Donovan Mitchell, who's very good rookie year, took a little bit of a step backwards last year. Miles Turner, Jason Tatum, Harrison Barnes, Chris Middleton, Jaylen Brown, Joe Harris, Mason Plumlee, Marcus Smart, Derek White, and Brooke Lopez. All of whom, are good NBA players, right? None of them obviously are very bad. But the only one that really pops out to me is a Kemba Walker as an all-star. I think Jason Tatum is very good for young players. So is Chris Middleton. We already mentioned Donovan Mitchell, but none of them are the all-stars that we've had in the past.
Well, this team definitely lacks a little bit of chemistry right now. They really only came together here in the last week. They've seen so many players in and out of the locker room with all the withdrawals too. Like we lost De'Aaron Fox in the last couple weeks. We lost Kyle Lowry. Kyle Kuzma pulled out with an ankle injury. So this team has lost a lot of their flexibility in their roster right now, especially at the guard position. So it's going to be interesting to see how they make it work, especially when they come against some of the better teams in this tournament. So, like Jokic right now, he's out there for Serbia. He's going to be beast. I hear that the Serbian team is actually going to be probably like one of the biggest competition in this tournament. And then Greek Freak's out there for Greece, and it's amazing to hear the pride that this guy takes in this tournament. Granted, he's going to be surrounded by a lot of nobodies, but we've seen in basketball, one player could really swing a whole thing, and none of the players on the USA roster were able to stop him throughout the entire season. So it's going to be interesting to see if that matchup comes to fruition.
Yeah, and the other thing is, for so many of these countries, to them, this is their big moment, right? So for us, it's the NBA Finals, and that's sort of what everybody's pushing towards. For them, a lot of times, I'm sure they have their own, whether it's country or regional, right, like across Europe or whatever it is. But for them, the world is a huge thing, and, they're sending their best players that they can. They're trying to win it, and so is USA basketball. But I think what happens a lot of times is, especially this year, is the NBA a lot of people, I think, are a little bit exhausted from last season and the way that it ended. And so you also ended the season seeing Boogie Cousins go down. You saw Kevin Durant go down. You saw Klay Thompson go down. So I think some players are erring on the side of caution, saying, hey, I don't want to risk possibly injuring myself playing in the summertime. But two, the NBA is so wide open this year. I think a lot more players are saying, forget about the world championships. Like, I'm trying to win an NBA championship with my team. And this year is my best chance to do it before Golden State gets back to full health, before the Nets are back to full health. And so I think there's a lot of dynamics that other countries don't necessarily have that we have. And that might be part of the reason why we're putting out such a weak team this year.
Well, it's funny because the way we always have heard about the American stereotypes, like America, all this, we take everything too seriously. We like to prove our dominance other nations. And then when it comes to this tournament, you mentioned the pride that some of these other nations take in how they're going to perform in this tournament, and how it just doesn't feel like our team is taking it seriously. They do say, and one phrase I've always liked is, complacency is the killer of giants. And this team, I don't feel like they're giants is the big thing. I know technically, again, this is the only roster that every single player on the roster is an NBA player. Technically, analytically, they are 66 wins above replacement compared to the rest of the tournament. And you compare that to even like the 92 Dream Team that everyone always talks about, which is ranked at a 94 wins above replacement. So it's interesting when you hear that, that's still a huge positive, a huge plus in that category. But this, like you mentioned, we only really have Kemba Walker, who's a third team all NBA, and then a bunch of guys who have potential. And it's so disappointing when you look at players that should have been on this roster. Like De'Aaron Fox, he's a young guy. I feel like he has no excuse to have been dropping from this roster. Kyle Kuzma, if he's legitimately hurt with the ankle, sure. Okay, I could buy that a little bit. But we're going to talk about this guy a little later, too. I feel like there's no excuse for a Devin Booker to not be on this roster. Or, gosh, name another player, American, that's young, that's not on necessarily a playoff team. I think we should have been seeing more turnout. I understand if LeBron doesn't want to play. That's one thing, I understand if James Harden doesn't want to. He's won a gold medal. But to see these guys who haven't really proved anything either in the NBA or proved anything even in going back to college in the NCAA tournament, show a little pride or a little work ethic. You can't necessarily play with the idea, oh, what if I get hurt? Because you could get hurt at any moment. You get hurt getting out of bed in the morning. We've seen so many stupid injuries over the course of professional sports. You realize in the MLB, a guy went on the DL for trying to iron a shirt while he was wearing the shirt? Stuff happens.
Oh, I believe it. One of the funniest ones that I had heard, so like I said earlier, I have back injuries, right, and back problems. And so I was at the chiropractor one time. Chiropractor told me there was one guy that he was not able to adjust because his back was so messed up. And it was from turning, to get toilet paper while he was on the toilet. whatever he did, it just messed up the discs in his back and jacked them all up. And it was so bad to the point where a chiropractor was like, hey, like I legally cannot work on you, right? Like you have too many back issues for me to be able to work on. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's not like NBA is the NFL. We talked about all the problems that the NFL has.
Mm-hmm.
Guys aren't like beating each other up, beating each other to death out there, you know? Like, sure, you can twist wrong and tear something, but again, you could do that just going down the stairs.
Yeah, and like I said, I think right now it might be because there was some really big injuries that were suffered in the past few months, right? Especially when all eyes were on the NBA. So you're looking at, that Toronto Golden State final, and you see Klay Thompson come down and his knee, shift wrong, and you could right away tell like something's torn right there. And then you see Kevin Durant, and you could see the point where his Achilles pops and it wiggles. And so I think right now some of the young players, or players just around the league in general, might still have that sort of trauma, I guess, in their mind of like, hey, I saw that Achilles snap. That's gross. I don't want that happening. And so I think they implicitly know like, hey, the risk of injuries are low in basketball. But at the same time, I think it was so recent that for them, it's probably still fresh in their mind. And so they're like, hey, I don't want to risk that.
Okay. Well, if this team loses, who do you see them losing to at this tournament?
So
let's rephrase that. What's a realistic expectation for this team? Do you think that they're the favorites for the gold medal still, or do you think this team could legitimately lose?
I think both, right? So I think they're a slight favorite for the gold medal still. Like you said, they still have all NBA level players, right? And granted, these other teams have some really good players, right? There's Jokic is out there, and you mentioned the Greek Freak is out there. So granted, yeah, there's some really good players that are still out there on these other teams, but there's definitely nobody with this level of talent. And so I would still expect them to bring home a gold medal, but it's not unrealistic to say that maybe they lose in the semis.
Yeah, that's a big one. If the league MVP is playing because he loves his country that much, then De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley, you have no reason to not be in this tournament.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree.
All right. So do you have anything left on this, or do you think we should go into this week's headlines?
One last thing when it comes to USA basketball that I will say is at least from what I remember, this was like the third or fourth rotation that Pop was sort of doing as far as like who the starters are and who the closers are and all that. And so I think Pop was experimenting with, who fits well with who, who should I have on the courts playing next up to some of these other guys. Whereas Australia was on, they were basically set. So they used all the same starters all the way through the exhibition games. I think they're pretty much set in their rotation. And so if you have a loss in which you're trying to figure out how your players fit best together, I think that's okay. And, Pop being the smart coach that he is, I think he's going to be better prepared. He's going to now know, hey, here's who my best starters are, here's who my closers are, and here's who plays well in the second or the third quarters. And so I'm not too worried, especially having a genius there, a basketball genius like Popovich at the
So you basically see like Pop basically utilizing kind of like a playoff rotation, like try and get as much Donovan, Spider Mitchell, Tatum in there as he can, and then kind of try and figure everyone else as they go.
Yeah, I think so. And he's smart enough to now make different adjustments and realize, okay, here's, the lineup that we had that lost the last time or whatever it was that blew that 10-point lead. Maybe it was, poor defense that we had in that moment. Okay, I'm not going to play these poor defensive guys together. I need to have at least one good or two good, really good lockdown defenders on the court at all times or whatever it is. But I'm sure he'll make good adjustments.
Yeah. Well, like I said, they're favorites, but they've definitely lost a little bit of street cred going into the tournament. So this was a big week for headlines. So I'm excited. We have a big rundown coming up here. So starting it off, were you surprised that Conor McGregor came out of hiding to actually give an interview? Because I remember I was at the gym. I just look up on the cameras. I see Conor McGregor talking. I'm like, wait, what? He's actually given an interview after all that? Like,
yeah. So, and especially, it was sort of unprecedented. Like, nobody had said, hey, we're going to have an interview with Conor McGregor coming up next week or anything like that. It sort of just happened, and I started getting some notifications on my phone that Conor was having an interview.
Yeah, it was like 9-10 in the morning, like Central Standard Time for me, and just like, wait, why is he even like doing this? I mean, granted, okay, he's trying to get ahead of it, but considering everything that's happened between breaking someone's phone in Miami and punching the dude at the bar in the first place, he is a runaway train right now as far as like the news headlines go for him. Like, this is like our third week talking about Conor just in our show's existence, our 1 month existence. We've already brought up Conor 3 times now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because he can't get out of his own way. So, I mean, going into the actual interview, so it was interesting. So he started off kind of like a bumbling, stumbling mess. You could tell he was a little bit nervous. He's a little bit shaken by how much blowback he's got from this issue. So when I look at it, let's see. So some of the main ones that stands out. So he's talking about, does he think that this is it for him? The host, Ariel, like from the ESPN interview, basically asked him, do you think you have an anger management issue? And he basically kind of like dodged the question. Like, he didn't really want to answer it too much. He did admit he was in the wrong for the bar situation, which is a big step for Conor. I don't know if that's really necessarily good for him legally to have a nationally televised interview saying, yeah, I was the aggressive party here. Mm-hmm. But I think his lawyer's not going to be too happy about that. But I don't think it's good. So one of the ones I found interesting, too, is just in terms of future fights. He said he was supposed to fight in July, but apparently he broke his hand sparring.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how much I believe that. So I don't want to say Conor's lying. He obviously knows what's going on in his camp and in his world. But that dude's fought in with like a torn ACL before, and he is a warrior. So I don't know. To me personally, Conor was coming off, like you said, his whole demeanor was changed. He's well known for being, that high energy, really spunky dude. That, maybe has a slight anger issue, but people enjoy that. He's, antagonistic. And to me, he just seemed really defeated. And he did not seem like he really wanted to be there in that interview. And some people might say, no, he was just remorseful, right? And sorry for what he did. But to me, it just seemed like he was out of energy. He seemed beat up. And, going back to the Andrew Luck situation where we talk about, like, this is exhausting, right? I think for Conor, it's a little bit different, but he is literally getting beat up every single time. But he's made the most money out of any UFC fighter. He's won 2 belts. And I know he says that he wants to keep fighting and that he had fights scheduled and all that. But it's exhausting having the media always around you. It's exhausting having these fans shoving a phone in your face or getting into bar fights with old dudes. So I personally think that Conor doesn't necessarily want to come back. Like, I think he knows, hey, I probably need to say this just for my fans and to save face. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's an Andrew Luck situation where he's like, hey guys, like I'm done. Like I've quit. And he's even posted a few times on Twitter like that he was going to retire. And granted, he never really did, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does.
Well, fighting retirements, they just, for some reason, never stick. I mean, we've seen so many fighters try and come out of retirement when they said, I'm done. I think, who was it recently that just came? Chuck Liddell came out for a fight against everyone's best wishes. And when it comes to Conor, he's only 31 years old, and there still is some buzz for potential rematches here. So he tried to hype up the potential for going at Khabib again. Considering how bad that fight was for him, I don't know if that's the best route for him to go, but he wants to prove something. He even, in the interview, he said he injured his foot prior to the fight. I don't know if he was trying to play that off because he knows he got basically molly stomped in that match. And then, of course, his camp got molly stomped by Khabib's camp later there too. And then he said basically too, this last UFC 241 remotivated him, seeing Stipe come back, win the belt, seeing Nate Diaz come out there and win, which I think could be potentially him just trying to set up that trilogy fight with Nate Diaz. But we talked about it. Diaz has already talked about the Masvidal fight. He's not even thinking about Conor. And Conor says he wants to fight before the end of the year. I don't know who that could potentially be for him. I was hearing about him potentially fighting, was it Cowboy Cerrone before his kind of like recent run-ins here and apparently breaking his hand. So I don't know, what's a good fight for Conor if he doesn't get one of those big ones? And like you said, should he even be doing it?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with sort of the reverse. So I'll start with the should he. The fact is, in his Floyd Mayweather fight, which was a boxing fight, right? It wasn't even an MMA fight. That is the most money an MMA fighter has probably ever made on a single fight. So I want to say he was close to 100 million, if not more than that. You're never going to get that same money, no matter how many MMA fights that you do, right? So it doesn't matter what his next fight is. If he's fighting Khabib, especially one where he's probably coming in as a major underdog to Khabib, he's not getting paid $100 million. Even if he fights Nate Diaz and people want to see the trilogy, and there will be, I think, still a lot of people that would pay for it. Not as many that would have paid for it had it happened right after the second fight, right, within a year or so or two. But you're not going to make $100 million. And so I think that's where this is different, is with those other fighters, a lot of times they had to keep fighting because they weren't getting paid that well, right? Like at most they were making maybe $1 million per fight, maybe $2 million. And then you have your sponsorship money or something like that. And so you have to keep fighting. Similar to what you said about football, right? Is you have these players that keep going just because it's like, hey, I can't retire on this. Whereas Conor, he's made enough to retire for sure. And now you're going to come back and fight for basically peanuts compared to what you made in that Floyd Mayweather fight. So that's sort of where I think the dynamic is different for Conor McGregor.
From a marketing standpoint, do you think this interview hurt him? I feel like it really defeated this character. You mentioned it actually too. This character in our heads that we think of when we think Conor. Like if anything, I would have preferred he not gave this interview, and in his next fight, he really played up that villain role. He's been playing it for a long time now, that anti-hero villain establishment. But now, like I feel like he just has this scared dog look right now after this interview. I just. If he tries to hype it up in the way, like I'm coming back, I'm big bad Conor McGregor, I'm going to knock all you fookers out and shit like that, I won't buy it now, just basically after seeing him in this.
Yeah, like I said, he just seemed defeated to me. Like he didn't have the same energy. He didn't have, sort of that, hey, I do what I want attitude. No matter, I always thought he was a jerk, but at least it was entertaining, right? Watching him smash buses, take people's belts away, jump out of the cage to, go run up to Jose Aldo. And so now it's kind of like, you just seem sort of like a beat up dog or something, right? That is just trying, like, and now it seems like all he wants is just the next big money fight, right? Like he's talked about, oh, I want to fight Khabib. It's like, you got your butt whooped by Khabib. Does anybody really want to see that again?
Khabib doesn't want it too, like he literally downplayed the even thought of facing Conor again, because why would he? Like he has much bigger fish to fry. He does. Conor's the furthest thing from his mind right now.
Yeah, and then like some of the other things, like he wants the Nate Diaz trilogy, which, like I said, would have made a lot of money a few years ago if it had happened 1 year after the second fight. But now people are like, Diaz, Diaz obviously won the first one in a decisive way. A lot of people didn't think the second fight was all that great. Like Conor turned his back literally and was running away for parts of the time. And so it's like, that's not really a good moneymaker. I would pay to see Cowboy Cerrone and Conor McGregor fight each other. But then is that even, the main event on a card, right? Like, can that be your main event if it's not for a belt, it's not for anything, right? Like they would have to give him an interim belt. And I think everybody would know, okay, this is just a gimmick.
It would have to be the main event, though, because I don't know what card you throw him on where it wouldn't necessarily be the headliner. Like, there's a lot of talented fighters, but at the end of the day, Conor's still going to have that name value that will be able to sell pay-per-views. more than your average fighter. But yeah, like going back to the Nate Diaz, they play the same kind of role right now too, because Nate Diaz is getting hyped up as that anti-hero role that Conor was a couple years back. So I think we've seen the best of Conor McGregor.
I think so. I mean, honestly, if I'm Conor McGregor, here's what I would hope for. I would hope that Dustin Poirier can beat Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think the chances are slim because Khabib's one heck of a fighter, and everything that I've seen, he hasn't slowed down in any of his fights, right? The dude barely loses even a round to people, let alone a fight to people. But if Dustin Poirier is able to somehow pull out a win, which Khabib leaves his chin open, and Poirier is a pretty good striker, he might be able to catch Khabib. Conor McGregor has already beaten Dustin Poirier once. So maybe Conor can say, hey, I want to come back. I want to fight for the belt. I think Dana White would give that to him right away. That would be your main event. And Conor has a legitimate shot at saying, hey, I already beat Dustin one time. I could beat him again, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so I think I'm ready to move on to our next set of headlines here. So who would have thought the Miami Dolphins would be able to steal headlines this week? So not necessarily for anything on the field that they're doing, but we had this incident that comes up. So rookie head coach Brian Flores. So it's well known that Kenny Stills was not a fan of the Jay-Z Rock Nation deal. A lot of people actually weren't. Many of the blowback is why they're just throwing money on top of an issue to distract from the main cause. Well, Colin Kaepernick doesn't have a job. So obviously Kenny Stills basically came out and said, well, they should at least talk to me or Colin or Eric Reed or one of these big players in the protest before they went out of their way to do this. We'll get into whether or not the Rock Nation deal was a good thing, but Brian Flores decided to tell his music guy at practice, you know what I'm feeling? Let's play some Jay-Z. So Kenny Stills was not too thrilled about it. He apparently, after the whole incident, went to his locker, started playing some Nas, which is some 90s hip-hop rivalries revisited there. Come to think of it, I was listening to the Linkin Park Jay-Z remix, you know, of Numb. Now, that's still top 10 track of all time. But aside from that point, what do you think of Brian Flores doing this?
Yeah, so, I mean, Kenny Stills, right, is obviously very close with Colin Kaepernick. He feels very strongly on this issue. And I get the way that Flores sort of came out and explained everything. So his explanation for it was, I wanted Kenny Stills to get used to playing with distractions, no matter what the distraction is, whether it's something to do with music and Jay-Z, right, and the protest, or if it's, you know, opposing fans yelling at you for taking a knee or whatever it is, right? So I get that logic. But at the same time, you know, you're a new head coach. You don't have a lot of rapport with these guys. And is that really like this sort of borders on sort of the politics sort of issue, right? And that's one of those big things that you don't want to discuss with people right away, or at least challenge them on, right? Like, I'm not going to walk into my new job and be like, you know, do you support people sitting or standing for the national anthem? And I think that's where it sort of pushed a button. And for me personally, I think Flores might have pushed a button a little bit too soon.
Well, you know, it's interesting because it would have been one thing. Obviously, there's racial dynamics anytime we talk about this issue. It just is. Brian Flores obviously is a person of color. You know, he came out in his presser and said, hey, listen, I'm the son of an immigrant. I'm black. I grew up poor. I grew up during stop and frisk. I understand this. I've lived through these issues. So believe me, I sympathize for the players. In fact, he says, like, ultimately above anything else, he supports the greater issue. Now, my kind of contention is just like, I feel like Kenny Stills could be supportive of the deal between Jay-Z and the NFL in a way. Like, I know money doesn't necessarily fix everything. Like, we've been throwing money at a lot of issues for a lot of years, and it still hasn't necessarily changed for the better or worse. But I do also believe that putting your money where your mouth is tends to help things more and more. That's why, like, I was actually one of Colin Kaepernick's like bigger defenders when he first started doing this, because he actually was out there donating his contract and everything, actually out there in his community saying what he was going to do, and it worked. Where I've kind of lost a lot of my interest in Colin Kaepernick as this issue has went on is he's become this silent figure that never speaks, and we don't really know what he really thinks on this issue. Right now, Bills is one of his bigger mouthpieces, so it's interesting to see him taking one of the bigger roles here and then getting shut down by a coach who, again, it grew up with all these circumstances himself and understands it better than your average Caucasian coach.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that's interesting. And so to give a little bit more background on why this is so contentious, is that Jay-Z has openly come out and said, like, hey, we should not support the NFL until Colin Kaepernick has his job back, right? And he said that several times. He's even said, nope, I won't perform at the Super Bowl, turn them down from the Super Bowl, because he's basically said, you're not hiring Colin Kaepernick, I'm not doing anything for you, and I'm going to tell all my people the same thing. Then Jay-Z comes out and says, hey, I'm partnering with the NFL, and there's even rumors that he's going to become part owner and stuff like that. And so I think Kenny Stills feels that Jay-Z is sort of a sellout, right? But Jay-Z had a good quote, and I think a lot of people, I won't say a lot of people, but some people are like, oh, it's just BS. But Jay-Z has said, similar to your point, hey, we've moved past kneeling, right? Now we have to actually do something and do something actionable. And that sort of goes back to what you were saying about Colin Kaepernick, with him being so quiet, is that nobody really knows where he stands on the issue or what he's doing for the issue or why it's such a big deal still. Whereas Jay-Z has now at least said, hey, I'm going to partner with the organization that you wanted to change, which was the NFL, right? Well, or at least that you had power and you wanted the NFL to do something. So I'm gonna partner with them and help them do something on the issue.
Yeah, so it's gonna be interesting to see like what if this is gonna be a net positive. There's a lot of people that doesn't like it. It's not just Kenny Stills. There was a lot of pushback on it. Like you mentioned, Jay-Z has had very contentious talks about the NFL in the past, so it was weird that he kind of like came out of nowhere to do this partnership. I don't know. I like I said, money doesn't necessarily fix everything, but I do think that you do, in a capitalistic society, it does make sense to be able to actually put that money into the schools. Like, so the exact quote is, the idea behind this partnership is it's supposed to help with education and economic advancement, police and community relations, and criminal justice reform. If it has a net positive for that, I don't see how Kenny Stills and other players can really hate on it that much. We'll see how it plays out, but just going to Kenny Stills as a whole, so right now, in theory, the Dolphins could actually cut Kenny Stills and save $3 million in cap space. We know the Dolphins are in rebuild mode right now. They named Ryan Fitzpatrick officially their starter, which obviously is a disaster for Josh Rosen, but I don't know. You have anything left on this issue before we move on?
I don't really have too much. I think you're exactly right. We have to see how it plays out with Jay-Z and do they really do what they say they're going to do, which we don't have a whole lot of information on exactly what their plan is and how much money they're going to be donating and partnering in which neighborhoods. So I do want to see a little bit more of the plan because that's the thing. If they do a really good job, and like you said, it's a net positive, I don't see how you can't, back and be supportive of this partnership where they're actually doing something that you said was the issue. Where I could see it being a big problem, though, is if they don't do anything, then it legit just looks like greed from both the NFL and Jay-Z's part, in which Jay-Z wanted to, promote his music company, and the NFL sort of just wanted to have a little way of saying, hey, look, we're kind of doing something, let's get people to finish shutting up on this issue and get back to football. So I think we got to see where it sort of goes. The other interesting thing, though, real quick on the Jay-Z aspect, is his music company is actually pretty good. I know that the NFL always has some Mexico City games, and Jay-Z's music label, right, so Rock Nation, they have quite a few Latin artists on their label. And so one of them being Shakira, who's very popular. I don't think she's Mexican per se, but she at least can relate to the
between the Dominicans and the Mexicans.
I know. So I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to say, right, everybody from South America is the same. I 100% know that. But like, I think it's cool for, maybe the Mexico City games can get an actual Latin artist that they enjoy, right? Or at least one that's very popular to have perform at their games and sort of build that market a little bit more.
Well, we'll see. Like, first we have to be able to have a game in Mexico. As you remember, they canceled.
That's true.
Game, which is still better than what they had to do last weekend for the Packers-Raiders game. So I'll close it with this. Jay-Z said it back in the 90s. He got rich and gave back, so that's the win-win. Mm-hmm. All right, so Patrick Chung is in the headline. So another New England Patriot in the headlines for the wrong reason. So he was indicted on cocaine charges in New Hampshire. He's been a 10-year veteran, 9 years he played with the Patriots, 3-time Super Bowl champion. The question I thought that came to mind when this issue happened is, if the Patriots hadn't been winning like they have consistently for the last 20 years, would we say this would probably be the most dysfunctional franchise in the NFL? You think about Aaron Hernandez, Spygate, Deflategate, Julian Edelman's PED suspension, Robert Kraft's special happy fun time massages, Brady Belichick power struggles with the Jimmy G trade, a 45, 50-year-old quarterback still in the league.
Mm-hmm. Josh Gordon even, right now he's back, but Gordon being suspended, for drug policy violations. And
they once signed Albert Hainsworth, too, who was a bust in Tennessee.
Yeah, so I definitely think that they could be. The other thing, too, is Bill Belichick he rules with the iron fist, right? Now, granted, he's probably behind some of these, right? So he's probably behind Deflategate and they had the Spygate and all of that stuff. So Bill Belichick is not innocent in all this, but because he rules with such like a strong, fist and he's, so like, hey, nobody leaks anything to the media. You guys, aren't going to talk, about these issues with the media. I think he's been a big reason for why the Patriots, a lot of their dysfunction and issues aren't as talked about as they probably should be. Whereas, look at my Steelers, right? Everybody's always talking about, oh, Big Ben said this, Antonio Brown. And that was only just like play-wise, like in on the field, right? Like we had our off-the-field issues with, rape allegations and other things, right? But everybody's always talking about other teams' dysfunction, whereas Bill Belichick's teams, nobody really talks about them.
Yeah, arguably the most dysfunctional team in the NFL. It's kind of like interesting if you really think about it. Those Super Bowl rings act more like hand sanitizer for this entire like franchise. The way that like we just 99.9% of the germs are wiped away, but that 0.1% kind of lingers in the background, and that's these like issues I specifically talk about. We really only see about it when a new meme comes out, honestly.
Yeah. So what I think is interesting is, especially with a lot of these seasons, that they have blatantly got caught cheating a lot of times, and yet there's never really been like a very big punishment for the team as a whole. And so do you think for a lot of these seasons, right, with like Spygate, Deflategate and all that, should they have been punished more?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they've lost draft picks in the past. I mean, what are you going to do, short of taking away the franchise from the Crafts or something, which I thought was going to happen after Robert's allegation, but that kind of really got swept under the rug fast. Like, we haven't even talked about. Just a note on Robert Kraft. How is it a power move or is it a sad move that they literally had the AFC Championship game in Kansas City? He flew down from Boston to Miami that morning, got busted in this sex trafficking ring, and still ended up back there to see them beat the Chiefs that night.
I don't know. But part of that could have been like, hey, I got a whole bunch of money. Let me out of jail so I can go back. That's what I think it was, right? It's like, hey, look, I got as much money as I need to get out of this place. Yeah. It's crazy. One thing that I will say is interesting, though, about Robert Kraft is he was one of the big backers behind the Jay-Z partnership. And I wonder if it's because he's gotten so much flack for one, the massages, right, down south.
Game respect game, Jay-Z and Robert Kraft just.
Yeah. And and Robert Kraft has also been very open politically, and I don't want to bring politics into this into the podcast, but I will say is he differs very much from some of the players that are kneeling, and so I wonder if that was an effort for Robert Kraft to sort of save face, right, especially for his franchise too.
Well, Robert Kraft actually has a great dynamic with a lot of players who disagree with him politically.
Yeah.
With his relationships with a lot of players on this New England roster, and even just in the Boston community as a whole. So, only time will tell whether or not, this has another happy ending for him. We'll see how the Patriots do. But it's not just Patrick Chung who was in trouble this week. Boogie Cousins was in trouble this week. He was issued an arrest warrant in Alabama. So third-degree harassing communications, domestic violence misdemeanor. The tape came out with TMZ. Of course, we have to preface, this is all allegations. But it's pretty damning. If he's found guilty of this, it's minimum a year in prison.
Yeah, and so I feel
run away if he drops the soap because he has a torn ACL.
So, I just feel so bad for Boogie Cousins, right? Like, this is really his, at least to my knowledge, his first big issue off the court issue, right? Outside of the locker room. And people, I think Boogie Cousins got sort of a bad rap as, oh, he's not a good locker room guy. And he does play very tough, right? And he will foul you hard and he will talk crap to you and stuff like that. And so I think he always got this bad rap as being a bad guy. But now, like, this issue, it sort of adds to, that sort of notion of, oh, Boogie Cousins is a bad guy. Like, and now if he is able to come back from his injury, right? Like, do teams even want to really be involved? And so he went from being a potential max player to basically being a vet minimum. And I think that's part of, maybe why these things are happening and he's acting the way he is, right? Because if he's fully healthy, he's practicing with the Lakers, I don't think he's out in Alabama doing this stuff. Like, I think he's got his head on straight, but now I don't know where he's at mentally.
Okay, so the full story behind it is apparently it's just basically a disagreement over the phone with his baby mama here, Chrissy West. So apparently he was upset. These emotions are very highly emotionally driven. Basically, she refused to allow his son to attend his wedding, which took place this past Saturday on the 24th, August 24th. And it caused an emotional reaction. And then suddenly, again, 3 days later, we find the tapes out there on TMZ. That's why these things are always so messy. Like, no one really wins in these situations. Like, we go back to the Tyreek Hill tapes that we talked about last week. They were very out of context, and we still don't know what happened in this issue. This one, is just a guy who's angry. He's upset. If he would actually done any of this to this woman, obviously we know that the crime that would have conveyed. But, this is a guy just saying some crazy stuff because he just got told, I can't have my son, which is always brings out a reaction in people.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And like I said, one, it's an emotional time for him, right? Like, he's suffered 3 major injuries all within the last year. And like I said, he went from earning, tens of millions of dollars to earning millions, still good amount of money, but that has an emotional toll on you. Went from being one of the best players in the world to now everybody's saying, hey, if he comes off the bench and can, sort of get back his production, that's good. And then on top of, like you said, the mother of his child basically saying, hey, you're not going to be able to see your son. And the bond between a father and son especially is super strong, right? Like, I think every single one of my friends, at least, right, that has a child or is planning on having a child here soon, they're all hoping for a son. Like, that's what every guy says. Like, everybody loves their daughters, of course. Every father loves their daughters. But every guy is like, hey, I want a son. I want a son. Just because you're super close with, having your own, boy. And so the fact that he's not able to get to see him, right, and have him attend a wedding is is awful for him.
Split custody it's a rough lifestyle. Like any parent or child that's ever had to go through it knows that the emotional burden that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just never a winning situation for anyone, really. No one ever leaves those situations truly happy. But, I don't want to bring the show on a whole, bringing down here. So let's kind of lighten it up. Let's talk about this whole Devin Booker's just absolute despisal of getting double teamed in pickup games. So he was in an open gym this week with other NBA players. Joakim Noah was there. And it's a bad day if Joakim Noah is clowning on this. So basically one of the things he said is, he was getting double teamed, is we're not doubling an open gym. I get the shit all season, bro. Let's work out our own game. And Joakim basically threw it back at him. Is yeah, this is part of the game. And my thought on it is, okay, so if you're getting doubled every game and this is a problem for you, isn't it good that people are double teaming you off this season? That way you can work on it, know what to do in those situations, and hopefully maybe you start overcoming some of these double teams.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. So first I want to start off with Joakim Noah is a gangster, though. He's not afraid of anybody. He doesn't care what your status is. He doesn't care how good of a player you are. He will tell you to your face, hey, you're being, of words that I can't say on our podcast. Or, well, I guess I could, but I won't say that, right?
We're not getting sponsored quite yet, so
I'll keep it clean for now. But Joakim knows he's not afraid to call out anybody. And I want to say there are even times where he's gone at LeBron and he's gone at, other star players. So I totally respect that out of Joakim Noah. I actually wish that's who the Lakers would have gone with instead of Dwight Howard.
As long as it's not Cleveland, I don't think he's allowed there anymore.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Would you go to Cleveland, bro?
No. So that is what I want to start with by saying, Joakim Noah, he's a gangster. I always appreciate guys that are willing to call, people out, especially if you're trying to improve. Now going on to the Booker thing, sort of like you said, right, is it's the summertime. And granted, I get not wanting to get injured. So no, don't have chase down blocks, right, where guys potentially run into each other and stuff like that. No, don't foul me hard where, I'm going for a layup and you lay me out, right? I 100% get that. But this is an actual basketball situation. And you're exactly right. Why wouldn't you want to get better in the summertime? This is the time to be working on, okay, what would I do right here? How would I make that difficult pass? Or how do I get the help over that I need? Or how do I get out of this situation? And the fact that Booker is oh, no, I don't want to work on that right now. And granted, I've never played at a professional level, so I don't know what it's like.
Yeah, but what's one thing we've always been told as former athletes ourselves is don't work on the thing you're already good at. Work at something you're terrible at to get better. And here's the thing. We already established that Devin Booker can score. He's averaged his league average is 23.4 points in per 36. He's a 43% shooter as well. So we know he's a great scorer. But you know what else? He's also lost all 3 50-plus point games he's had in his career. Lost to Boston when he put up 70, lost to Utah and to Washington in back-to-back games, putting up 59 and 50. So he has some work. And this Phoenix Suns team led by him, I know you need help, but we've also seen plenty of teams win with just one guy carrying them on an NBA roster. And they haven't been able to top 24 wins in the 4 years he's been there. A 259 win percentage, you'd at least like to think you'd see some improvement on that. And they've gotten guys there too. DeAndre Ayton had a very underrated rookie season. And even Josh Johnson has showed some flashes defensively. So you think some of these high draft picks are at least helping to his supporting cast.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. And the fact is, right, he has to deal with front office being inept, right? And the front office not really being able to possibly pick the best guys that fit around them. But people go through that though. LeBron James has gone through that with some of the Cleveland teams in the past. Now, granted, last year he wasn't that good with the Lakers, but he's had to elevate his team. The Greek Freak even, has done a good job. Now he had some other decent pieces around him this year. But yeah, I think if you really want to say that you're an all-star, you have to be able to elevate the game of everybody that's around you. And Devin Booker hasn't learned that. And so Devin Booker 100% will always, go out and get your points. But right now he's almost making the case for, hey, he shouldn't be your go-to option. He needs to be your second or your third option on a really good team.
Yeah, I'm just, the more and more I watch this and watch that specific video of him, I just think this guy doesn't have an inner dog. The difference between analytics and manalytics, he's missing something there. I mean, like I mentioned earlier in our Team USA talk, why is he not on that team? We already know the Suns are not going to be a playoff team this year. So you know what? Take advantage. Represent your country. Go out there. Maybe by working with some of these other superstars, you pick up something. But no, he's decided he wanted to sit it out. He says he wanted to get healthy when his agent talked to Jerry Colangelo back in May. But what does that mean? From what I can tell, I didn't hear anything about a big Devin Booker injury this year.
Yeah, no, I didn't hear anything about a major injury from him. The other thing is they're so bad, like you said, they're not going to make the playoffs anytime soon. They'll probably even be another lottery pick team again this year. And so does it hurt if you sit out the first 10 games of the season and just say, hey, I'm still recovering from playing with USA basketball? Now, maybe he does have an injury, right? And I never want to fault a guy for taking care of their health, especially athletes. That's how they make their living. But I think the times where you get better, right, are playing in those live game situations. So you need to be able to, practice and drill certain things, but then you go out and you test it in a live game situation. And that's exactly what USA basketball would be perfect for is, hey, let me get my practice in, and then I go out and test some stuff against, players that are probably not as good as these NBA players that I would be playing against. And so I can see, hey, here's what's working for me, here's what's not. And let me improve on the places where I'm not as good at in the regular season, like you said earlier.
And, too, to add to that, Devin Booker has thrown it out there, specifically when he signed his extension with Phoenix, that he wants to make Phoenix a hot free agent destination. Where's a great recruiting place? USA basketball, playing with some of these other stars. Some of LeBron James' biggest friendships came from playing on some of those USA squads. And he's robbing himself of that opportunity. I feel he's probably not going to steal anyone from the Celtics roster or something like that, but maybe he steals a good role player that could have fit well with him in Phoenix. But no, he's just a young guy making an irrational decision in my mind. But yeah, he does have his supporters. So one of our favorite Twitter personas, KD, came out in support of the no double teams clause. So KD on Twitter, guard up, it's pickup. If you weak defensively, then work on it in summer because you need a double during the season, then coach sitting you on the vine. So this brings me to our next kind of set of talking points here. Who's a better Twitter follow, AB or KD?
They're both ridiculous right now. I almost want to say KD, though, just because he has burner accounts and he'll call anybody out. If you're a random fan and you just message KD hey, you're trash, he will respond to you. Whereas AB, I don't think does that as much. He has had some times where he's gone out of his way to respond to people he really didn't need to. But KD is always posting crazy stuff. He's super sensitive to media and social media. And so if you go at him, right, and KD, you're trash, he'll spend his whole week thinking about something to say to you. So I got to give it to KD. I think both of them need to stay off social media, though. If I'm their agent.
I mean, the thing, too, is KD literally just has a whole year just to tweet nonsense from the bench while he's just waiting to get back out there for the Nets. And speaking of the Nets, so both KD and Kyrie are pushing for Carmelo to get signed over there. Is this a good fit or is it a pity signing?
I mean, I think it's kind of a pity signing. Now, with KD being hurt, right, for this whole season, he's going to be out this whole season. I don't think it hurts to at least have him on maybe the 1-year deal, right, and a 1-year team option or something like that, of that minimum, where it's low risk to you. It keeps Kyrie happy. It keeps KD happy. And then you maybe get to have a farewell tour for Carmelo or something, though I know He never played for the Nets. He played a lot of his career with the, opposing team, the Knicks. But at least you get to send Carmelo off sort of in the right way.
Is it the right way, though? I mean,
yeah,
averaging less than 20 points, looking like a shell of himself. We talked about it when we were mentioning Carmelo's interview on First Take. Like, how do we want to remember Carmelo? Do we want to remember him as Denver Nuggets, New York Knicks Carmelo putting up 50-point games, just the sheer athleticism, everything? Or, I mean, honestly, chubby, just, again, shell of his former self, Carmelo, going out there, having a Vince Carter second half to his career where he's just driving down his per game averages week by week. If I'm not mistaken, he didn't make a single shot in his last game against OKC, which should have been a big game for him.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's sort of just sad, the trajectory that Carmelo's been on. And then he came out with the interview, saying that the game doesn't love him back. And so you just sort of feel bad for the dude, right? Sort of like a little bit of what we were talking about with Conor McGregor is like, the aura has worn off. Now with Conor McGregor, like he still has a little bit of that aura. But with Carmelo, it's sort of like you got forced out of this league. You're not a good player.
So with that said, I guess the moral of the story is stop doing ESPN interviews. Do interviews with us. We'll make you feel good.
Yeah, I guess that could be the takeaway, right? So I mean I know I know what you're saying. Is it the right way to send Carmelo? To me, I personally think it's better than being forced out and saying, hey, you're never playing again, and the league forced you out. So at least you come back, come off the bench, and if you could help Kyrie maybe get to the playoffs again, right? And you go out on that note.
Let's talk about it a little. What's a successful season for this Nets team, knowing they're probably not going to have Durant?
Yeah, so they're not going to have Durant. D'Angelo Russell was able to get them to the playoffs last year. They had a first round. Yeah, they had a first round exit. So I would say if you're Kyrie, you almost have to feel like you at least have to make the playoffs again, which I think they will. Especially in the East, right? Is still weaker compared to the West. But yeah, I would say I'd be happy with another first round exit, more competitive though, right? Like maybe get it to a 6-game series, 7-game series. And if you go out in the first round, then you say, hey, we're looking good. We're going to get KD back next year. And, then we're making our push for the finals.
Just the sheer personalities that they would throw into that room, though, if they added Kyrie, Carmelo, and KD, it sounds like just something ready to implode right there. Speaking of our other favorite Twitter follow, though, AB, so he had to strike back at former teammate Big Ben this week. So Ben was in an interview himself, and he was sounding very remorseful. He wishes he could have done things different. He says, I think I ended a friendship here. But then he did the typical Big Ben thing and strikes back. He's like, I did the same thing to rookie James Washington, and he thanked me for it. Which, if you're going to compare James Washington, a rookie, to potential, Hall of Famer Antonio Brown, that's a whole different thing. Then AB comes in there. He's just like, never friends, just had to get my ends. Shut up already. So I think with just the damage that AB's done to his legacy in the last 5 months, do you see Ben more as a sympathetic figure now? Are you still putting up the same theory? Because whenever this whole thing started to blow up, I definitely was feeling for AB, thought Ben was the worst, and then just they just flip-flopped consistently, and it's only one to blame is AB.
Yeah, no, so I totally get it, right? And there was a lot of personalities in that locker room. I think we've said it before on this show, but I know we've at least said it, when we're talking to our, between ourselves offline, is that it's almost like an NBA team, right? So we just talked about Kyrie, KD, Carmelo being, sort of a weird locker room dynamic. It was the same thing when you had Le'Veon Bell, AB, Big Ben. Now, I think you're exactly right. Is Big Ben never should have said oh, well, I talked to a rookie and he responded, well, yeah, of course. Like what exactly is Washington supposed to do? Tell you off, right? Like you've won Super Bowls and you're his quarterback. You're, the veteran. and he's a rookie. Like, he's not going to tell anybody off. He's just going to shut up and take it. Even if he didn't take it well and thank you after, like, he's not going to tell you anything, right? But so I think Big Ben made a mistake in saying that. He probably should have left that part out of his interview. But yeah, the whole AB saga and the crazy things AB has been doing, coming in on hot air balloons, freezing his feet, like, to me, it just makes AB look like, oh yeah, you're a big headache. Like, I feel bad for Ben Roethlisberger having to put up with you.
Well, let's go down the list. Like, of everything that he's done since he got out of Pittsburgh. Actually, I think he even did like the shop interview before he got out of Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken. So shop interview, dyes his mustache, has that Twitter beef with Juju where, well, not me, with Juju Smith-Schuster,
yep.
where they're just going back and forth, and he came out the worst for that one too. Like, remember when he did that one, like he dropped Juju dropping into his DMs and it was like, hey, Mr. AB, can you help me out with my wide receiving skills? And AB threw that out there like that was supposed to be some sort of disrespect to him. Of course he's going to ask the greatest receiver in the game at that point for tips. Who wouldn't? It makes sense. Like, if you're aspiring in any career to ask the most successful person what they do well. Going on besides that, so like you mentioned, the hot air balloon, the cold feet, the helmet issue, which he's still going on and on about. I just watched Hard Knocks last night, and he's just talking about how the helmet sucks, it's uncomfortable, yada, 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 yada. And it's just like, what's next?
Yeah.
Next?
Even something
go for it, man.
Even something that you sort of left out, right, is even he wasn't supposed to be a Raider first. He was supposed to be a Buffalo Bill first. And even then, he forced his way out of that. Like,
my Niners, too. We were like the favorite to land him. Jerry Rice was all for it. He was hyping him up. And we bailed on it because we just saw that train wreck waiting to happen. And we thought, you know what? Our neighbors across the bay probably should take him with them to Vegas.
Yeah, and then, we go back to the Juju Smith-Schuster thing, right? Is Juju is one of the nicest people by all accounts that I've ever heard. One of the nicest dudes. Juju Smith-Schuster, you're very nice too, Juju. But Juju Smith-Schuster, right, is one of the nicest guys. Very humble beginning. He's always smiling. So even in the preseason, every time they show him on the sideline, he's just got a big old smile, big old grin. He never talks bad about anybody. He didn't even call out AB. He just said, hey, Big Ben's a great leader, that's the quarterback that's going to be thrown to you this season. Like, why wouldn't you say that he's a good leader? And then AB comes out and just starts attacking Juju out of nowhere, and Juju didn't even say anything to him. And so, yeah, AB's just looking like a huge headache. And honestly, people have been saying, oh, there's addition by subtraction with the Steelers. I think it showed a little bit in the preseason. Like, I personally, I'm a biased Steelers fan, but I think we've looked pretty good so far. We didn't win our last game against Carolina, but I think this team looks better.
Preseason week 4, no one cares. You bring a positive influence like a Devin Bush, you ship out AB. Here's a question as we close out this topic. Does AB even make it to Vegas?
His contract is hard to get rid of. Right, like
you're paying still.
Yeah, it's hard to get rid of, and so there's not a whole lot of people, especially with AB's behavior. Like, you can't trade him, right? Like, we already said, Bills, 49ers, like, they basically said, nope, we're giving up on this. We don't want him here. So what other teams really want him? There's not a whole lot of coaches that would be able to control AB. I think at this point he feels that he's bigger than, a lot of teams are, or at least than a lot of coaches, especially with all that he's accomplished. And so I would like to say that, yeah, they get rid of him if he continues this way, but I just don't know how you feasibly can.
Yeah, I mean, as the Canadian Raiders would say, he's 20 yards short of a full football field. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of football, we're going to close it. So, this is probably going to be our last podcast before the start of the regular season. Next week, we got Bears, Packers, Thursday Night Football. We got our fantasy draft on Sunday, so tune into the Fantasy Football Podcast with Ayers, Blake, and Lee taking place this Sunday, live draft, 14 teams, PPR, IDP, fun league. Anyway, so we're going to make our last predictions. We already made all our record predictions in the division preview, so we're going to go over the NFL awards right now. We're going to do comeback player of the year. We're going to talk about our rookies of the year. Then we're going to shift into head coach, and we're going to close it out with MVP. So right now, I'm going to throw it out there, and I'm going to go first. Jimmy G is going to be my comeback player of the year. I feel like being a quarterback, he's already at an advantage, and he just needs to manage to do what a lot of other quarterbacks do and play a full year. And I think this Kyle Shanahan offense will be enough to kind of push the voters in his direction. I think I'm not going to put him up in that upper echelon tier. I think that would be jumping the gun. But I do think he could return to form in a big way. And coming off a major injury like an ACL, I think that's all you really need for the comeback player of the year. Obviously, it showed with Andrew Luck coming off his missing year. So that's kind of like where I'm feeling. How are you feeling on the comeback player of the year?
Yeah, I see the logic behind that. I think Jimmy G did not impress me, though. And granted, we talked about it a little bit, right? He's coming off injury and having to get used to things. Maybe it's a little mental thing. So I don't want to beat that drum. But I could see that, especially quarterbacks. They're the ones that tend to be looked at the most, right? And so if he can at least have a league average season, it could be potentially good for him. I'm going to go with some tight ends here. So one, I'll say possibly Delanie Walker. I think he could have a really good year. He's also sort of getting towards the end of his career. So if he can come back, have a really good season, I think a lot of people would like that. It'd be a good fan story. The other one, and I don't know if he qualifies or not, but does Jason Witten qualify for comeback player of the year?
I guess technically we always just assume it's a guy coming back off injury, but I guess retirement could as well. The problem is, like, Jason Witten was kind of more of a league average player when he retired. I don't know if that's necessarily going to take a step up coming off a year of not playing.
Yeah. Though I will say is, Dak does like a lot of those short passes.
Yeah.
Jason Witten is well respected, right? I think he can be slightly above average. The Cowboys are pretty good. They've got an easy first few games, even without Zeke. So Zeke's not there, especially.
Before we move on to our next award category, though, I gotta ask, what has a better chance of happening? Jason Witten being a Hall of Fame broadcaster, or winning comeback player of the year this year?
I would say comeback player of the year is a much higher chance than him being a broadcaster.
All right, so
I don't think if he retires, I don't think he goes back to broadcasting personally.
I would say that's probably unlikely. A little unfair to him. He got thrown on the Monday Night Football broadcast. It's not like he got thrown on an 11 o'clock start time game. So
yeah.
Anyway, So the way we're going to format this, I went with comeback player of the year. Kick us off on defensive rookie of the year. Who do you see winning that?
So defensive rookie of the year, I got to give it to my boy. I'm going to say Devin Bush. So he's fantastic, has great energy. From all things that I've heard, he's a really good leader. So as long as he can stay healthy, which he has for the most part in his career, he's quick, he's strong, he's athletic. So I'll give it to Devin Bush.
Well, you do have some interesting prospects that were taken at the start of the draft. You had Quinnen Williams out of Alabama go with the Jets. You had Nick Bosa go to the Niners. But I love Devin Bush. Like, he flashed a lot in the preseason. I think he had one game where he had 10 tackles in like a half. So, the guy's a stud, and I think that he's going to be so fun to watch. He's going to really lead the Steelers' defensive unit, and that's why, the Steelers might sneak up on people. A lot of people read him off, but I like what that guy brings to the defense. So I'm going to transition into our offensive rookie of the year. I think, again, I got to show love for the quarterbacks. It's easier for them to win it. And as down as I was on Kyler Murray last week, I think that he probably has the best chance to win this award, being that he's going to be a week 1 starter for the Arizona Cardinals. And again, if the air raid could produce at the same level it has in college, his numbers are going to look ridiculous by the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I could totally get that. Where I'm concerned for Kyler is he already got beat up a lot in the preseason. And, I know that they were trying to say, well, this isn't what we're going to run in the regular season, and this is just preseason and all that. I'm just worried that the team around him just isn't talented enough, and the coaching staff doesn't know enough to make him successful. So I don't know if I necessarily see him as Rookie of the Year. I'm going to go David Montgomery on this. I know that's sort of what he's the favorite, I think, right now.
Okay.
So I think it's a safe pick. He's a solid running back, really good. I know that they want to preserve Tariq Cohen a little bit, but I think Montgomery can win it still.
Well, hey, a sleeper fantasy pick, which you can tune in to the Fantasy Football Podcast with Eris Blakely to find out. Anyway, okay, so moving past the rookies, it's your turn. Bring us into the Coach of the Year discussion.
So this is somewhat tied. At least one of these picks for me is tied to who I've got for MVP. But I'm going to say Sean Payton is one, right? Like, especially if they have another really outstanding season and, basically a Super Bowl contender season, I think he could win it. The other one, with Andrew Luck departing, if Raish can keep the team afloat and actually have like a good season, Reich, whatever it is, Reich, however you want to say it, I think he can do a decent job and possibly get Coach of the Year, as long as, like I said, if he can keep this team together and they still really perform well, even if they don't perform as well as maybe some of the other people in the AFC, I think he could still be up there for Coach of the Year.
Okay, if Freddie Kitchens can find a way to rein in this like huge band of personas, I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to give him Coach of the Year buzz this year. It's interesting because obviously we forget about like the old guard of coaches too, but you got to give Andy Reid some credit. I think it's just because we just take for granted that we know he's going to be good, that a lot of times you typically don't win this award, which is why I'm going to put as like a sleeper dark horse pick for Coach of the Year. I'm going to give Doug McDermott of the Bills a chance. If he could get this team back to the playoffs, I think a lot of people are going to give him some hype. Even Doug Marrone out of Jacksonville, potentially, if they could return to form as well. So I am going to start off the MVP discussion. And if you haven't caught on by my first two picks, I like quarterbacks winning awards. So I'm going to give it to my homeboy, Patrick Mahomes. I said it in the AFC West preview. I could see him repeating his numbers, if not improving on them. He threw for over 5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns last year. I honestly could see him producing at that same level. I mean, this Chiefs unit is just so amazing. Like, if they have all their pieces just firing on all cylinders, there's not a lot that's going to stop them. And obviously with Andrew Luck now gone, the AFC conference as a whole is theirs to lose.
Yeah, and I think we already saw like Tom Brady also taking a step back, right? Even in the Super Bowl, he didn't look as sharp as he has in the past. So I wonder if Tom Brady continues to sort of decline. The Browns are good, right? Or at least everybody seems to think that they'll be good, but we still don't quite know how the chemistry is going to work over there. And so I think you're very right and spot on with Pat Mahomes. For me, my pick, though, I'm going to go with Drew Brees. So part of this is I just respect the man, right? I love the way he's played over the years. I think he can have that, like this one last super good season. Hopefully, I wouldn't be upset if Drew Brees won another Super Bowl this year. Out of all the teams, probably, right? Like, obviously, I want the Steelers to win one, but if Brees were to win it, I'd be 100% happy with that. And so,
a good guy, but you want to know who the true MVP is? My co-host, Aundre Huynh. Thank you for sticking with us through another episode. We love you guys. We appreciate our listeners. Be sure to follow us on @Slumpbuster Podcast, on Instagram, @SlumpbusterPod, on Twitter, and @SlumpbusterFFB if you want to stay up to date with our fantasy football news. Thanks again. Do you have anything left before we close out, Aundre?
Nothing from me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having me on, Juju.
Like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.
Thanks once again for listening. We'll be back next week with episode 6 of the Slumpbuster with Juju and Dre. But first, join us on our 14-team live draft on the Slumpbuster Fantasy Football Podcast. Follow us on Twitter @SlumpbusterPod, on Instagram @SlumpbusterPodcast, or our fantasy football Twitter @SlumpbusterFFB. Be sure to listen, comment, subscribe, and leave us a review. Once again, we'll see you next time.